The snow had begun to fall early that year. By the time Helena Carter lit the last candle in her living room, the garden was already cloaked in white, as if God himself had laid a blanket of silence over the world. Her home was modest, nothing but a cottage nestled in the quiet woods of rural Virginia, but it held everything she needed: books, a creaky rocking chair, a collection of winter teas, and her memories. Too many memories. She opened the old cedar box where she kept her letters, each one addressed to Lila Evans, her granddaughter, her light, her mystery, her loss. 17 letters, one per year, each one folded with trembling hands, sealed with hope, and never sent. Until now. This year, Helena couldn't ignore the pull in her chest, the ache that tightened every time December rolled around. She sat at her desk, the room dim except for the warm glow of the candlelight. Her pen hovered above the page. She didn't know what exactly she would write, only that she had to. This one would be different. She wrote not just of memories, but of longing. She described the tiny blue glass doll she'd made with her own hands, the one she had wrapped in soft linen and left on Rebecca's porch when Lila was barely a year old. She told the story of the lullaby she used to sing, the one her own mother had once sung to her. When she finished, she held the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. If Rebecca finds this first, if she burns it like she did the others. She stood to toss the letter into the fireplace, her usual ritual of surrender. But just as she reached out, the light flickered once, twice, and then she saw it. A red cardinal, vivid as blood against the snow, perched on the branch just outside the window. It wasn't moving, just watching her, unblinking. Helena's breath caught. Her mother used to say, "When you see a cardinal in winter, it's someone you've loved, whispering that you're not alone." Tears welled up in her eyes. "You're still with me, aren't you? And you want me to send this." She stepped away from the fire and walked toward the desk. With a shaking hand, she sealed the envelope and wrote one word on the front: Lila. No return address, no explanation. Just a message sent into the unknown, held together by hope and divinity. She put on her coat, slipped her feet into boots, and braved the frozen wind. At the edge of the road, she placed the letter in the mailbox and closed the rusted lid. "Please let her be the one to find it," she murmured to the trees, to the sky, to the stars. And as she turned back toward the house, the cardinal took flight, circling once above her head before vanishing into the snow. Helena smiled through her tears. God was still listening. Lila Evans wasn't expecting anything that morning, certainly not a letter. She was 17, neck-deep in finals, hormonal chaos, and a lingering sense of loneliness she couldn't explain. Her mother, Rebecca, had left early for a hospital shift. The house was still. The mailbox creaked when she opened it. Bills, flyers, a crumpled magazine, and then an envelope. cream-colored, slightly yellowed at the edges. Her name written in delicate cursive on the front, Lila Evans. No return address, no stamp markings. It wasn't wet like the rest of the mail. It felt warm in her hand, impossibly untouched by the winter air. She frowned, glanced around the street, empty. Then went inside, her pulse beginning to race for no clear reason. She didn't know why, but this letter felt personal, intimate, like something sacred. She sat on the kitchen floor, back against the refrigerator, and opened it. My sweet Lila, if this reaches you, it's because God wanted you to know the truth. Lila's breath caught in her throat. The letter was signed by Helena Carter, a name she didn't recognize. The words were tender, full of nostalgia, and carried the weight of someone who had loved her deeply and from afar. Helena described things no stranger could know. She mentioned the little blue glass doll with the velvet ribbon, Lila's favorite childhood toy, long since broken, which her mother claimed she found at a thrift shop when Lila was a baby. But the letter said otherwise. Helena described wrapping the doll in silk and leaving it in a small box on the porch. Said she had made it herself, fused from glass beads and love. Lila's hands trembled. She flipped the page. I don't want to confuse you, darling, but I need you to know I exist, that I never left you willingly, that you were and always will be my light. It didn't make sense. Her grandmother was dead. That's what her mother had always said. She died before Lila could form memories. That was why there were no pictures, no stories, no keepsakes. But this wasn't from the grave. Just then, the kitchen radio, which had not worked in years, crackled to life for a single second. A line from a hymn whispered through the static, "And he shall reveal what the darkness concealed." The radio went silent. Lila froze. Her heart thundered in her chest. She looked at the letter again, at the blue ink, slightly smudged in one corner like it had been kissed by tears. She should have thrown it away, called her mother, demanded answers, but something deep and quiet told her not to. Instead, she folded it carefully, placed it in her notebook, and carried it upstairs. Something was happening, something bigger than she understood. And whatever this was, it had just begun. The first thing Lila learned about her mother's house was that certain questions had no answers, and asking them came with consequences. The second thing she learned was never touch the attic door. Rebecca Evans was the kind of woman who folded her towels into perfect thirds and labeled the pantry jars in alphabetical order. Shoes were lined at right angles by the front door. Conversations were brief, especially about the past. No photos adorned the walls, no framed baby pictures of Lila, no wedding photo of her parents. When Lila was younger, she thought it was normal. Now, it felt like a vacuum where a family history should have been. And then there were the rules. We don't keep old things. Don't go into my room when I'm not home. Never open the attic. Rebecca never yelled. She didn't need to. One look, sharp as glass, was enough to shut down any rebellion. Lila once asked who her grandmother was. She must have been 8 or 9, curious after a classmate talked about baking cookies with her Nana. She remembered asking, "Did I ever have a grandma?" Rebecca had gone pale. "No," she answered. "She died before you were born. We don't talk about her." That was the end of that. But Lila never forgot the way her mother's jaw clenched, the way she scrubbed the counter until her knuckles turned red, the way she cried silently in the bathroom that night, thinking Lila couldn't hear through the walls. Years later, Lila pushed again. She'd found a silver locket while organizing the hallway closet, a tiny oval with a faded picture of a baby on one side and an unknown woman on the other. She brought it to her mother. Rebecca snatched it from her hands like it was a lit match. "Where did you get this?" she snapped. "I thought maybe it was Grandma?" Slap! It was the only time Rebecca had ever hit her. The slap wasn't hard. It didn't bruise, but it shattered something between them. Rebecca spent the rest of the night chain-smoking on the back porch, muttering things to herself, one hand pressed to her temple like she was holding her mind together with her fingers. After that, the attic got a new lock. So when Lila held Helena's letter in her hand and reread the line, "They erased me, but you are strong enough to remember," she felt the chill run down her spine. Because her whole life, the past had been forbidden, and now it was knocking. Her mother returned late that night. Lila sat at the kitchen table pretending to do homework. Rebecca dropped her purse with a thud, poured a glass of wine, and stared at her daughter. "What?" "Nothing," Lila said, folding the letter deeper into her notebook. That night, Lila dreamed of a woman with gray hair singing her name softly. She woke with tears on her cheeks and one word burning in her mind. Why? The attic key wasn't something Lila had ever expected to find. It happened by accident, 3 days after the letter arrived. Rebecca was at work and Lila was supposed to be helping with laundry, but she was restless, too many questions with nowhere to go. She found herself in her mother's sewing room, running her fingers over the neat spools of thread, each color arranged in a spectrum so precise it looked like it belonged in a museum. That's when she knocked over the old metal sewing kit. It hit the floor with a dull clink, and something inside rattled strangely. She picked it up, opened the lid, and there, hidden beneath layers of pins and a small pair of scissors, was a tiny brass key. Worn, slightly rusted at the edges. No tag. Her breath caught. Could it be? She waited until that night. Rebecca took her sleeping pill at exactly 9:30 p.m. every evening. Lila watched as her mother drank her chamomile tea, the pill swallowed between sips the same way she always did. She waited 20 minutes, then 30. When the house had settled into silence, Lila crept upstairs with the key tucked in her sleeve. The attic door was at the end of the hallway, stiff with disuse. Her hand trembled as she inserted the key. It turned with a soft click. She paused, listened. Nothing but the faint hum of the fridge downstairs. She opened the door. The attic smelled of old cedar and dust. Moonlight streamed in through a small, grimy window. Boxes towered like forgotten monuments. A blanket draped over a rocking chair moved ever so slightly, making her flinch. Leela moved slowly, heart pounding. She found a box marked only with a symbol, a small bird drawn in faded ink. Inside, wrapped in a floral scarf, were the items that changed everything. A brooch in the shape of a bird, wings outstretched in mid-flight. A bundle of letters tied with twine, and at the very bottom, folded carefully between two linen handkerchiefs, was a death certificate. Helena Carter. Date of death, March 5th, 2009. Cause, unspecified. No medical stamp, no hospital name. The certified by section was blank. Instead of a signature, there was a faint photocopied stamp. Leela stared at it. It looked fake. She opened her laptop and searched for the certificate ID number on the government site. Her hands were sweaty, fingers shaking. No record found. She searched the obituary database. Nothing. Leela felt like the floor beneath her had shifted. The woman who was dead might not be dead at all, which meant Rebecca had lied. And if she lied about this, what else had she buried? As she descended the attic steps, her foot slipped slightly on the last stair. She caught herself just in time. Her mother's bedroom door creaked open. Rebecca stood there, disoriented from the sedative, but eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" she asked groggily. Leela tucked the certificate inside her hoodie and forced a smile. "Just couldn't sleep." Morning came gray and cold, but the heaviness in Lila's chest wasn't from the weather. The forged death certificate, the bird-shaped brooch, the sealed letters. Her mother had lied, not just about the past, about a person, a life. Helena Carter wasn't just a name and a letter. She was real and possibly still alive. Lila hadn't slept. She sat at the kitchen table, clutching her coffee mug, as Rebecca moved about the kitchen in practiced silence, cracking eggs and slicing bread like it was any other day. Her movements were mechanical, sharp, like someone fighting to stay in control. Lila couldn't take it anymore. "Why did you say she was dead?" The words sliced through the room. Rebecca froze, knife suspended midair. Slowly she turned. "Who?" Lila met her mother's gaze. "Helena Carter, my grandmother." Rebecca didn't blink. She set the knife down, walked over to the counter and poured herself a glass of water with trembling hands. "I told you," she said, her voice barely audible. "She's dead." "No," Lila snapped, standing now. "She's not. You lied. I found the death certificate. It's fake. There's no record anywhere. I looked." Rebecca's glass slipped from her fingers. It shattered against the tile floor. For a moment, neither of them moved, just the sound of water trickling between the glass shards. Then Rebecca walked to the sink, back turned. "She's dead to me." Lila stepped forward, voice shaking. "Why? What did she do that was so terrible you had to erase her?" Rebecca whipped around suddenly. Her face was pale, lips quivering with something between rage and grief. "She tried to take you from me." "That's not what the letter said." Rebecca stormed past her, into the living room. Lila followed, heart pounding. On the table lay the torn remains of Helena's letter. Lila had foolishly left it out. Rebecca picked them up slowly, one by one, and then, instead of throwing them away, she folded them into a neat little stack. She opened the drawer beneath the bookshelf, removed a faded velvet box, and placed the torn letter inside it. Alongside it, the bird brooch Lila had hidden the night before. "You said she was gone," Lila whispered. Rebecca stared at the box for a long time, then whispered, more to herself than to Lila, "She was never really gone." Later that evening, as dusk settled and quiet took over the house, Lila walked down the stairs and paused at the bottom. Her mother stood by the window, wrapped in her robe, unmoving. The house was dark. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting Rebecca's silhouette against the curtain like a ghostly statue. She stared out into the night with wide, glassy eyes, lips parted, as if waiting for something, someone to appear. And then she said, barely audible, she said she'd come back. Lila took a step closer. "Mom?" Rebecca didn't turn. "She said she'd come back if you ever found out." The next morning, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Rebecca didn't speak. She moved slowly, like her limbs were too heavy. When Leela offered to make breakfast, her mother just nodded, distant. Neither of them mentioned the letter, or the window, or the words whispered like a curse. She said she'd come back. But something had shifted. Leela felt it in her bones, like a door inside her had opened and it couldn't be shut again. She spent the afternoon in the backyard, pretending to read under the old oak tree, but really she was watching, remembering. She had been 11 when she'd seen her mother out here one rainy afternoon, soaked and muddy, digging beneath the rose bushes. She'd asked what she was doing, and Rebecca had snapped, "Never come out here when I'm gardening, never." Leela had never questioned it again, until now. The soil was still soft from recent rain. She brought out a small trowel and began to dig under the far corner of the garden, behind the overgrown azaleas, hidden from the house. After 20 minutes, the metal hit something hard, a rusted tin box. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, bundles of old letters tied with ribbon, stained by time. A photograph of a young woman with silver-streaked hair holding a baby in a yellow blanket. Her. The back of the photo read, "Leela's first day in the garden, spring 2008. Helena had been there, not just in stories, in memories no one had let her keep. Tears blurred her vision. One letter stood out, its paper whiter, fresher. It had never been opened. The handwriting was unmistakable. "My darling girl, I hope this letter finds you. I don't know if you'll ever read it or if your mother has destroyed every trace of me, but I want you to know I never stopped loving you. I watched you from a distance for as long as I was allowed. Your laugh, your little shoes, your way of talking to plants like they were old friends. You were never forgotten. Love always, Grandma Helena. Leela pressed the letter to her heart and looked up at the sky, where clouds moved like whispers across the blue. She didn't know what to believe anymore, except that Helena had never wanted to disappear. Someone made her disappear, and that someone was her mother. Back in her room, she found the envelope from Helena's first letter. The address had been smeared by moisture, almost unreadable, but not entirely. Beneath the ink, she made out a zip code and part of a street name. It was enough. Leela opened her laptop and typed what she could decipher. A small cabin near Riverton, Virginia. Population 832. There was no phone number, no email, just a physical address. She stared at the screen, then picked up a pen. Dear Helena, I got your letter. I want to know everything. ... Leela. The letter was mailed on a Tuesday. Lila walked to the post office alone, tucking it into the slot with trembling fingers. She whispered a silent prayer, not to be answered right away, but just to be heard. 2 days later, Rebecca found her in the kitchen. She was holding the original envelope, the first one from Helena. "Did you write back?" Lila froze. She didn't answer. Rebecca sat down at the table slowly, like her legs could barely carry her. "You don't understand what she did." Lila clenched her jaw. "Then tell me." Rebecca didn't speak for a long time. Her eyes were distant, staring at a crack in the table's surface like it could explain her silence. And then, in a voice that didn't sound like hers, she began. "After you were born, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't sleep. Every time you cried, I felt like someone was stabbing me. I didn't want to hold you. I didn't know why." She paused. "Helena came to help. She tried to soothe you, to give me space. She took you on walks, fed you when I couldn't. And people started asking why the grandmother was always holding the baby and not the mother." Her fingers shook as she poured herself a glass of water, but didn't drink it. "One night, I snapped. I told a nurse at your clinic that my mother was unstable, that she'd left you alone in the bathtub." Lila's eyes widened. "That wasn't true?" Rebecca shook her head. "Of course not. But once the system got involved, she didn't want to fight me. She didn't want me to be labeled unfit, so she stepped back." Lila covered her mouth, horrified. "You told me she was dead." Tears pooled in Rebecca's eyes. "Because it was easier than admitting I had broken the only person who was still trying to save me." There it was. Not a monster, not a villain. A woman drowning in guilt, fear, and the darkness of untreated depression. Rebecca folded her hands and looked straight at Lila. "I didn't know what postpartum was back then. I thought I was weak. I thought letting her go would help me be stronger. But it didn't. It just made me smaller, angrier, tighter." Lila didn't know what to say. She had wanted to hate her, But now, sitting across from this woman who had raised her with iron rules and quiet panic, she saw something else. A mother trying not to fall apart. Rebecca stood and walked to the cabinet above the fridge, one Lila had never been allowed to open. She reached up, pulled down a small wooden box, and opened it. Inside were photos of Helena, of Lila, of a life that could have been. I look at these sometimes. I can't bear to be asked why. Lila reached for one photo, her fingers grazing a younger version of Helena holding her as a baby. The truth wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. But at least now, it was real. The air felt different now, lighter, but also heavier, in a way that only truth can be. Leela moved through the house as if the walls themselves had shifted, less like a prison, more like the remains of a secret once buried too deep. Rebecca had said her piece. She hadn't asked for forgiveness, just space. Leela granted her that. They didn't speak much over the next few days, but there were glances, softer ones, and the unspoken understanding that a storm had passed, but another might be coming. It was Saturday morning when the letter arrived. Leela had checked the mailbox every day since she mailed hers, hoping but not expecting. She recognized the handwriting instantly. The envelope was pale blue, her name written in elegant, careful script. Leela Evans, to the granddaughter I never stopped loving. Her hands trembled as she opened it. My darling girl, I cannot believe your letter reached me. I was afraid it never would, that too much time had passed, or that someone would intercept it before it ever touched your hands. But you found me, or rather, God helped you find me. I have never stopped praying for this day. Leela sat down on the front steps as the sunlight broke through the trees. I live in a small cabin outside Riverton. I never moved far. I wanted to be close to you, even if I was told to stay away. I know this is a lot. You don't have to come. You don't owe me anything. But I will be here as I always have been this Christmas Eve. I will leave the porch light on. Inside the envelope, folded with care, was a hand-drawn map. No phone number, no instructions, just a tiny red heart drawn over a spot marked home. Leela held the letter to her chest. The ache she hadn't been able to name for years finally had a shape and a destination. She packed the small bag in silence, just essentials, a coat, her journal, Helena's letter, the map. When Rebecca saw her at the door, she didn't ask where Leela was going. She didn't try to stop her. Instead, she stepped forward and slipped a pair of gloves into Leela's coat pocket. She said, "It gets cold out that way." She always loved winter. Leela nodded. "Will you be okay?" Rebecca smiled, soft but tired. "I think I want to be, and that's new." They stood in the hallway a moment longer. Then Leela opened the door and stepped outside. The wind greeted her with a hush, like the earth itself was holding its breath. The road stretched ahead, quiet and endless. She didn't know exactly what she would find, but she knew one thing for certain. She had waited her whole life to meet Helena Carter, and now she finally would. The bus ride to Riverton took 5 hours. Lila sat by the window the whole way, her fingers tracing the edge of Helena's letter folded tightly in her coat pocket. The landscape changed from suburban sprawl to rolling hills and thick pine forests. The air grew colder with each mile, and she could see her breath when the bus door opened at the final stop. The station was nothing more than a bench and a wooden sign. A map pinned beside it confirmed the location Helena had drawn, a cabin by a lake just outside town. No public transportation, no Uber, just gravel roads, frost-bitten trees, and stillness. She began walking. Her boots crunched over frozen leaves. The wind whispered through the trees like voices from another life. The sun was sinking, gold and pale, painting the sky in soft oranges that reminded her of watercolor pages in forgotten storybooks. With each step, Lila's heart pounded louder. She didn't know what she was walking into. What if Helena changed her mind? What if this was a mistake? But she couldn't stop. Then, there it was, a cabin, wooden, weathered, small. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. A white rocking chair sat on the porch beside a planter of frost-bitten herbs. And hanging above the door, a small metal ornament of a bird in flight. Lila climbed the steps. The porch light was on. Her hand hovered just above the door. She didn't knock right away. Instead, she stared at the door frame, at the little crack where paint had peeled, at the wreath made of twigs and pine cones. Then the door opened. She hadn't even knocked. Helena stood there, older than the picture in the box, but unmistakably her. Silvery hair pulled back in a loose braid, warm eyes, tired, wet, alive. A wool cardigan wrapped around her small frame, and pinned to the left side of her chest the bird brooch. Neither spoke, not at first. They simply stared. Helena reached up slowly, as if she thought Lila might vanish, and cupped her granddaughter's face in both hands. "You're real," she whispered. Lila swallowed, her throat burning. "So are you." They stood there like that for what felt like forever. Then Helena pulled her in, wrapping her arms around Lila with a tenderness that felt like being wrapped in every good memory she'd never had. Lila's knees buckled from the weight of it, of all of it, and she let herself be held. "I dreamed of this," Helena said softly, her lips against her hair. "Every Christmas, every single one." Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and old books. A fire crackled. There were handmade quilts on the couch, and above the fireplace hung a photo of a baby girl in a yellow blanket. Lila stopped. It was her, not hidden, not erased. "This is your home too," Helena said gently, seeing her stare. Lila turned, tears falling silently. "It already feels like one." Outside, the lake shimmered under the rising moon, and for the first time in years, Lila felt the cold air kiss her cheeks, not like a warning, but like a welcome. Christmas morning arrived in a hush of falling snow. The lake outside Helena's cabin had frozen at the edges, and a soft wind blew through the pines, rustling branches like a lullaby. Lila awoke on the pull-out sofa, wrapped in quilts, the scent of cinnamon and pine in the air. Helena was already up, kneeling beside the fireplace, coaxing the flames to life. She turned as Lila stirred and smiled, small, warm, and complete. "Merry Christmas, my darling." Lila sat up slowly, still half dreaming. It felt surreal to be here, safe, wanted. After breakfast, homemade scones and tea, they exchanged simple gifts. Helena gave her a scarf she'd knitted herself. Lila gave her the photograph she had brought from home, the one from the box in the attic. "I think this belongs here now." Helena nodded, holding the photo to her chest. They spent the rest of the day telling stories, real ones. Lila heard about her mother as a child, wild and funny and soft, before the fear took hold. Helena showed her old journals, pressed flowers, recipes, letters she'd written but never sent. It was a new kind of love, one built not on obligation, but on reclamation. As the sun began to set, a car pulled into the drive. Lila stood, heart racing. Rebecca stepped out. She was wearing a long coat and no makeup, her face pale but calm. Her hands trembled as she clutched a small envelope. Helena opened the door before she could knock. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Rebecca held out the envelope. "I was going to send this," she said, her voice cracking. "I never did, but I want to read it." She stepped inside slowly. The three of them sat at the small wooden table, the same one Helena had eaten alone at for 17 years. Rebecca unfolded the letter. Her voice trembled as she began. "Dear Mom, I told myself I hated you. I told others you were dangerous. But the truth is, I hated the way you loved her when I couldn't. I was sick, and I didn't know how to ask for help. I needed someone to blame, and you were there." Her hands shook as she read. Lila reached across the table and gently placed her hand over hers. Rebecca continued, "I don't know how to undo what I've done, but I want to try, if you'll let me." The room was silent when she finished. Helena rose, walked around the table, and stood beside her daughter. She didn't speak, just placed a hand on her shoulder. That was enough. Later, the three of them sat by the fire, sipping tea. Helena brought out the old frame, the one that had stood empty on her shelf for nearly 2 decades. She slid the new photo inside, herself, Lila, and Rebecca standing in front of the cabin, arms linked, eyes red but smiling. Helena reached for her pen. She began a new letter. "Dear Lila, I was never dead, just hidden behind the silence of someone else's pain. But love, my dear, love always finds its way home." She folded the letter and placed it on the table. No envelope, no address, no need, It had already arrived. If this story touched your heart, you're not alone. So many of us carry silent wounds, unanswered letters, or a longing for someone we've lost, whether by time, by distance, or by silence. Here on this channel, we believe in second chances, in healing, and in the power of stories to bring us back home. If you believe that too, please consider subscribing. Every subscription is like another light left on, just in case someone out there needs to find their way back. Leave a comment below and tell us, have you ever received a message that changed everything? Or maybe one you wish you had? We read every word, and your voice matters here. And if this reminded you of someone, share it with them. You never know what door it might open. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.